Good morning and welcome to the Hibs Observer morning debrief with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Patrick McPartlin to look back at St Johnstone 1, Hibs 1 in the Scottish Premiership. The end of Hibs' winning run in the league, taking a point up in Perth. Patrick, how would you sum that up, that 90 minutes?
I think the one word that kind of stayed with me is inevitable. I think when you consider how many first team players Hibs are missing, how many players who aren't currently sidelined are kind of playing through injuries or managing knocks and issues, and given how busy the festive period has been, the fact that they've gone away to Aberdeen and taken 3 points with a good performance, they've done the same at Hearts. You could even argue the game against Kilmarnock last weekend. They kind of did have to scrap for that win. And I think, without being defeatist, without being kind of negative, I think there was probably always going to be a stage where the winning run did come to an end, and perhaps, I mean, there's actually a small part of me that maybe thinks the fact that they did come to an end yesterday, but not in a sort of, it wasn't as if they went away and got turned over 3-0. It wasn't a great performance, but they still sort of had enough to battle back and get a point. Now I know there's the caveat of St Johnstone being down to 10 men, but I think that shows there's still something in the team. But I have to imagine I wasn't wholly surprised with a point. And I think a lot of fans probably would have taken that given the previous fixtures the way they've gone. So not the worst point, given what's gone before and given the injuries and everything. But I think just because of the way the previous games have gone, it does feel a little bit like a missed opportunity, 2 points dropped. But again, we've said this about previous games. Hibs probably would have lost that earlier in the season. So I think pros and cons of taking a point.
Yeah, apologies for I've steamed right into today's show without giving a word for our sponsor, Good Vibes Giveaways. They're proud to sponsor the Hibs Observer and offer fantastic prizes to fans of the club. Prizes change weekly and include tech and gadgets, days out, weekends away, tax-free cash, and even Oasis tickets. So get your tickets now at www.goodvibesgiveaways.com. Sorry, where were we? Yes, I mean it is one of those where I think the schedule and the kind of mountain absentees and fitness issues are probably. It was. I had a feeling that it was always going to catch up with Hibs at some point. But does it kind of? There's still a kind of tinge of regret because of the fact that, as you said, St Johnstone were down to 10 men for so long, and then Hibs, end up kind of shooting themselves in the foot in the way by giving away that penalty. But yeah, that mountain to climb. St Johnstone have got something to hang on to. It could have gone differently, even with the sort of mitigation. Do you feel?
Yeah, it could have. I think we probably saw maybe the best and worst is a little bit strong, but we certainly saw the good and bad of Hibs from this season so far, in that, a couple of sort of individual errors or mistakes leading to the goal, and a lack of cutting edge in front of goal, but then still that kind of battling spirit to come back and just to keep that ball alive. Nectar Triantis heading it back towards goal, and Dwight Gale just showing that kind of striker's instinct to kind of poke it into the net. And that's, when you consider that, I mean, I think Triantis hit the post late on, Josh Campbell hit the bar, 2 shots off the line in the first half. You had Junior Hoylett and Martin Boyle coming close as well. It did feel a little bit like a kind of throwback to when Hibs were creating a lot of chances without anything to show for it.
Yeah.
And I think, I think we've probably seen. I mean, the Kilmarnock game is probably a good example of this. That we've definitely seen that even when reduced to a kind of, it doesn't feel too sort of much of a stretch to say a kind of makeshift first team, because when you consider the likes of Kurevic, Ekpiteta, Newell, Yuan. Well, Newell started against Kilmarnock, granted, but there's Kieran Bowie as well. A lot of players who have started games this season who weren't available at all. I mean, you consider, you look at the bench, the fact that Hibs are still able to name 9 substitutes while having so many players out illustrates just how bloated the squad is. But at the same time, yesterday was the first time really that we've seen David Gray having to rely or call upon people who, we kind of are under the impression aren't really in his plans. Like Dylan Levitt and Harry McCurdy coming off the bench yesterday. They've really struggled for game time under David Gray recently. So it was maybe a little bit of a surprise to see them coming on, but it does also indicate just, how little there was in reserve, and just how how much the guys who are starting every week at the moment, or not every week, every game, are kind of running on fumes. So, just I made this point in the analysis that if Hibs had another option in attack, we weren't having to play two wingers as centre forwards in this formation, which I think does get the best out of the team. But if they had somebody else, a natural striker, then I kind of get the impression that they would have put one of the chances away in the first half before the penalty or before the red card, and then it becomes, I think, a very different game. We have talked a lot about the what ifs of this Hibs team this season. So I think when you consider, David Gray said this afterwards, he's trying not to be kind of too downhearted about it all, because when you consider how far this team has come in a short space of time, then a point on the road is not the worst result. I mean, it's keeps the unbeaten run going. They've only lost once in the last 8 games, I think it is, and that was at Celtic when they were arguably a lot better than they've been on previous trips to Parkhead. But again, just had the chances, just couldn't take them. So that's I think that leads us nicely into the January transfer window, and just with we've already seen 3 players depart. There's sort of talk about other players who might be on their way. I think that it probably does lay bare what the club needs to do this month, what they need to bring in. I think the only concern is that it might have to wait until towards the end of the window, as we've seen before, that sometimes it can take a while to get in who you want. So that's maybe the only negative of that. But with a new head of recruitment in Garvin Stewart, and with a strengthened kind of link up with the Black Knights, you'd imagine that it might be the sort of window that could turn what so far has been a fairly on balance a fairly disappointing season into one that's maybe a bit closer to what the club and what the team hopes to achieve on a sort of season by season basis.
Yeah. So is that then the sort of main takeaway, I think, from that game yesterday? Even though there's been this turnaround, 1 defeat in 8 games, that game being to Celtic, these really good wins, a good few of them on the trot, but Hibs still need a strong window, despite recent results. That's a kind of reminder of how important this window is going to be.
Yeah, I think so, and I think the fact that we are looking at this result, a point in Perth, somewhere where Hibs have struggled in the past. It's been, a few games up there where they've lost by, maybe the odd goal, or they've been on a good run and they've just gone up and it's not happened for them. There's also been some games where they've gone up and they've played really well. Just thinking back to the first game post Paul Heckingbottom, where Eddie May took the team and they went up there. Christian Deutsch scored a hat trick, and it was the kind of performance that you thought, well, where's this been? So it can be a kind of funny venue for Hibs. They've had some good times and some bad times there, but I think earlier on in the season, we probably would, if it had been a point in Perth, we would have been saying, well, that's the kind of game they should be winning. But they're just not good enough. And now it sort of feels a little bit like we're saying they could have won that, but at the same time, there is that caveat of they've knocked their pans in for the last 3 or 4 games. They've beaten Aberdeen, Pittodrie, they've got a derby win. And ultimately, if you were going to ask Hibs fans, what would you rather have? Even including the Aberdeen game in that, or even the Kilmarnock game, then I think, I think it was important. The Kilmarnock game was important, with the sort of football for a fiver, full house. I think it was important to get a result that day. If the football had been great, but it had been a 0-0 draw, or they'd lost, then that's a lot of fans who come along and then think, well, I'm not going back. But getting the result that we did, people think, that's I'll consider going back. I'll consider maybe getting a half-season ticket. So that's a good thing. So I think if you had to sort of pick, if you had to pick a game at the start of the festive sort of fixture list, a game that maybe wasn't going to go exactly the way Hibs wanted, then you could probably pick this one out as being the one that they might struggle with even before the sort of the injuries and knocks started mounting up. But I think Hibs still have enough in the team to get a result. I think they'll probably feel a bit disappointed that they maybe didn't work the goalkeeper more, that they maybe had all those chances and only 1 goal to show for it. But at the same time, when you put it in the wider context of the season, it's not the worst result. It keeps the sort of unbeaten run going, and I think the chat from the coaching staff and the players will be, look, when you consider the effort you've put in, you consider what we've done, where we've won. Obviously a chance to go 5th in the table, which would have been really good for morale, would have been really good for just that sort of feels a bit like the next hurdle is sort of getting into that top six, and then after that, it's exploring how to stay there. But yeah, I mean, you say Tim's with regret. I think that's a good way of describing it. Not the worst result, not the worst outcome, but a little bit of a feeling that there could have been, there could have been a bit more from that, especially playing like an entire half against 10 men.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you say, not the worst result, not the best. I think it's a simple case of take the point and move on. Well, obviously, we will move on to the Rangers game that's coming right around the corner, as they all do at this time of year. But just firstly, you talked about the players who have moved on. So the transfer window is obviously open. So I just thought we'd maybe touch on that for a couple of minutes. 3 players off so far: Jake Doyle-Hayes, Nolan Kenna, and Josh O'Connor, all departing the club. I suppose Doyle-Hayes is probably the biggest talking point, considering just the kind of miserable time that he's had over the past year and a bit with injuries, and but it was probably an inevitable outcome in the end. Do you think was he always going to need to move on? Do you think, to try and get his career back on track, because he's a kind of just how long he's been out? It seemed to be recurring issues with that injury, and he's a kind of guy who just needs to be playing every week at this moment in time, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think as well, when you consider 2 separate occasions he's on the bench and he's getting abuse from fans when he's warming up. I mean, I know that came during the bad run. I know that came when things were, at a really low ebb. But when you've got a player who's been out for so long coming back, who I think it's worth noting was included on the bench over other players who've been fit and available, which I think maybe indicates what David Gray thought of him. But I mean, I wouldn't blame Doyle-Hayes if after that he just thought, I can't stick around here, because even if I am over my injury issues and he does appear to be, that mentally it's going to affect you when you've got fans sort of calling you a wage thief or whatever it is, or just questioning his attitude or things like that. This is somebody who, football's not just a hobby; it's his livelihood. It's what he wants to be doing. He's not been able to do that for a variety of reasons, and I think it does seem like there has been this really strange kind of switch in narrative to, he's a troublemaker, he's got a bad attitude, he's a wage thief, he's sitting around, doing nothing, happy to pick up a wage without contributing. But I mean, certainly I spoke to him a few times, kind of individually, in my previous role, and he was certainly somebody who wanted to be playing, who was frustrated with the way things were going, was frustrated that he could come back for maybe a couple of games and then there'd be a kind of flare up of the injury again, and then that would be more time on the sidelines. And I think it was interesting when there was that sort of interest from Forest Green a few transfer windows ago, and I think Hibs accepted the offer for him, and he wanted to stay and kind of fight for his place, because that was when he was starting to get into the team again. If I've got my timing right, he just had a baby about a month earlier, maybe at the start of December. So kind of understandable that in that position he would maybe want to sort of stay and fight for his place. But I think the fact that it's sort of taken so long to get to the bottom of the injury issues, and that can happen sometimes, an innocuous challenge in training or in a game. I mean, you've got Marvin Epiteta, he sort of suffered this, I think it's a thigh sprain in training, and it's just been one of those things where there's nobody near him, he's just sort of gone for a ball, and it's the luck of the draw, as they say. But I mean, I still maintain that a fit and available Doyle-Hayes probably would have been pushing for more involvement in Gray's plans. I think he's got something to his game that I think they're kind of lacking in midfield at the moment. There's a lot of midfielders in there who are very similar, and I think Doyle-Hayes has this sort of, I mean, even when he signed, there was this little bit of confusion, like, is he a box-to-box, is he a defensive midfielder? But I think he could kind of do both roles. And I think that, there were a few games more recently when he was available. There was a game away at Celtic Park where, he started, and I think it was a bit of a surprise to see him start. Hibs did end up losing 3-1, but it was a decent performance, and I thought he played well in the midfield. Mm-hmm. And but I just think when you've had the problems he's had, when you're not able to contribute, it's frustrating. You look at all these other players being signed who play the same position as you. You look at the competition for places. Couple that with the sort of the treatment he's been getting from some fans, and I think it's understandable why you think, even the club as well. The club say, look, we don't want you to go, but at the same time, they've got a duty of care to the player if they think, he'll be better served by moving on, getting a fresh start somewhere where there's not that history, not that kind of existing sort of atmosphere, if you like. Then that probably is probably the best for all parties. I think it's a shame the way it's ended, because I think there certainly were times that he showed he could be an effective player in that midfield, particularly when he had 30 metres over from Ireland watching him. But I think it does feel a little bit like things have to change at Hibs. It's obviously a different scenario, but in the same way that Hanlon and Stevenson eventually moved on in the summer after so many years of service, it just maybe feels like Doyle Hayes moves on, gets a fresh start, then it's something that the club doesn't really have to deal with this kind of almost like the elephant in the room, because the number of times that we would ask in press conferences, like, what's the story with Doyle Hayes? Is he fit? Can he contribute? And the sort of the manager or whoever's speaking to us would be saying, well, yeah, he's a couple of weeks away, and it felt like he was a couple of weeks away for a long time. There were certainly a lot of times where there'd be sort of positive updates and then there'd be nothing. And I think I've seen some people saying on social media, like, maybe the club could have been a bit more transparent with what was going on. And you think back to Ian Gordon's interview on January the 1st, and he was kind of alluding to the fact that communication between the club and the fans hadn't been great, and that they needed to improve that. I think people maybe put two and two together, but at the same time, there's there's always that situation where if the player doesn't want something to be made public, or if the player kind of wants to stay out of the limelight, then it's understandable that they might say, I don't want it to be addressed. I just want it to be kind of glossed over, if you like. But yeah, as you say, I think fresh start for the player, fresh start for the club as well. I think probably best for all parties. I think I said on social media, it's hard not to feel sorry for him, because he has just wanted to play football, and he's had all these sort of injury setbacks that came from sort of like the manager getting involved in training, because it goes back to Lee Johnson's time in charge, where they were playing quite a robust training game, and like he caught Doyle Hayes on the ankle, and that's what kind of produced this issue. It was like, I think an existing issue that then kind of flared up and needed treatment, and that's kind of where the problems have started from. So when you consider how much he played in his first sort of season at Hibs, I think it was 44 times in all competitions. And he obviously got that contract extension quite early on, and there was clearly high hopes for him, and it just hasn't worked out. But I think it'd be interesting to see where he ends up, and how he kind of fares from here on in. But at the same time, probably from his point of view and from Hibs' point of view, best for both parties to kind of go their separate ways.
Yeah, absolutely. We do wish Jake all the best. Hope he can get his career back on track very soon. So we'll finish off today with Sunday's game against Rangers. Another big game for Hibs, and an interesting one, because I think Rangers have been a pretty low ebb recently, and then they've obviously got that result against Celtic yesterday that nobody really seemed to see coming. So it kind of changes maybe the perception around them a wee bit. But then I feel like Rangers are one of those teams who have maybe kind of recently sort of suffered with that same thing that we talk about with Hibs an awful lot, that they get good results and then are unable to back it up. So it's hard to say whether this is a good time for Hibs to play Rangers, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think you look at Hibs and the way they've been going, and there's an argument to say that if they'd won in Perth, then Sunday's game would have taken on a different complexion. Somebody was pointing out that it was a Thursday, so that's the reason why Rangers played so well, which I thought was quite. I quite like that.
That's quite good, though.
But I mean, you make a good point about sort of Rangers and Hibs having this good result, but then unable to back it up. I don't really know what to expect from Sunday's game. I think if Hibs had played Rangers earlier in this sort of festive fixture list, when they were still on a high, when Ellie Yuan was at his flag bothering best, then I think there might have been a chance we thought actually Hibs could get something from this game. After yesterday's results, both for Hibs and Rangers, you're kind of thinking, well, I don't think it's a given that Rangers turn up and it's a kind of procession to a 3-0 win, and we're back to saying, oh well, it's just another step too far for Hibs. But it's I think Hibs have performed fairly well against Rangers at Easter Road in previous seasons. There's been the odd game where um, it's maybe been the wrong setup, or it's managers have tinkered a bit too much with the lineup, and it's affected the balance of the team. But I think Hibs are turning Easter Road into. I'm not going to say the F words. I'm not going to say a fortress, because they're not yet. But I think there was a time where it was particularly sort of poisonous. Like even before the game had kicked off, people would be grumbling in the stands. We've sort of moved on from that stage, and I think it's kind of like, it's still the sort of festive season, if you like. It's that sort of final game in the sort of Sunday, Thursday kind of run of games. And we know about the history between the two teams, especially since 2016. We know that it's always a feisty fixture, and I think Hibs can probably take a lot of heart from the last game at Ibrox, where they played really well and unfortunately didn't have anything to show for it. There's no reason why they can't kind of go out there and do the same thing again, put in a good performance. Like, yes, there's, players are tired, players are carrying knocks, but it's the same for, I think it's the same for Rangers, it's the same for a lot of teams at this time of year. And you maybe hope that if Joe Newell's back, if Ellie Yuan's available, David Gray spoke about them yesterday and was saying that Ellie Yuan is taking a bit longer to recover from that foot injury he picked up in the derby than they kind of thought he would. And I think the game probably came a bit too soon for Joe Newell. But even just having those two back in the team or available would be a bit of a lift. And at this stage, you do think that there must be a lot of players who are kind of just running on adrenaline at the moment. But I think that there would have been a time not that long ago where you'd be looking ahead to this game and saying, well, it's a big game. I mean, I know they're all big games when you're in Hibs situation. 2 points off the top six, but also not that far away from the relegation playoff places. Every point counts at this stage. But I think when you consider what Hibs have done already, to have 10 points from a tricky fixture list over Christmas and New Year is a good return. And I think I think a lot of fans would be more than happy with that if offered it at the start. So it's obviously it's not as if it doesn't count for anything, but I think there's maybe less pressure on the side than there might have been, and I think that's probably helpful. It's very difficult to know what to expect from both teams, just because of the amount of games that have been being played, and it just kind of depends. I think it's a home game for Hibs. They'll be desperate to kind of bounce back from the game against St Johnstone, where they maybe feel they should have won that. So that could have an impact. But I suppose it also depends on kind of what version of Rangers turns up and what version of Hibs turns up. So it's a very difficult one. It's hard to say like, oh, this will definitely happen, or it'll probably play out like this. Which is it's quite refreshing, I suppose. I mean, there's been a few games recently where you've looked at it and thought, well, Aberdeen aren't on a great run of form. Hibs seem to be finding a bit of form, so they might have a chance of getting a result, and then they kind of sweep them aside. And like, oh, okay. And then obviously go to Tynecastle, where they haven't won for 5 years, and then they get the victory and think, oh, right, yeah. So I think it feels like one of those again where head might say one thing, heart might say another. I think the way things were going for Rangers before yesterday, you might have thought Hibs have got a fighting chance. Now you're thinking, this adds a kind of another layer of complexity to it, whether it's going to really galvanise Rangers. I mean, I see a lot of Rangers fans saying, it was effectively a meaningless game given how far they are behind Celtic in the league. But again, Hibs can only play what's in front of them. They can only really, care about themselves, look after themselves, and I think they'll be desperate to put on a show at home. They'll be desperate to get 3 points, 1 point, whatever, to kind of keep this wee run of momentum going. And I suppose the absolute baseline has to be maintaining the unbeaten run. And if you can get 3 points, great.
Yeah.
If not, you take it as a good point in difficult circumstances, given who they've got missing and how many games they've played in sort of like the past, 10, 11, 12 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a fixture that's quite exciting in its unpredictability. We'll be there to cover it on Sunday, folks. So do tune into the Hibs Observer website and our YouTube channel for all the coverage of that. But for now, we're going to leave it there. If you are watching us on YouTube just now, then and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, then please do consider subscribing to support the channel. The support we've had recently in terms of subscriptions has been absolutely brilliant. So thank you to everybody who has joined us over the last few weeks. And if you do hit the subscribe button, it does help us keep continuing to grow the channel, and you'll also get a notification every time we go live, so you'll never miss a show. So thanks for joining us, folks. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll speak to you again very, very soon. Cheers.
Cheers.